really weird behind that speaker. But I'm here to introduce my favorite Watershed Protection Committee of Racine County Farmers group. But Jim Stute is going to come talk about cover crops, pay or not. So thanks again for coming back, Jim.
Well, thanks for having me and good morning, everyone. This is my third time addressing the group, speaking about cover crops, and today I'm going to tie it all together and make a business case for cover crop adoption. I'll tell you in a minute why that's so important. Anyway, the sign says it all. So this is one of the signs that our group has. Our cooperating farmers put these out to show the cover crops they have out in the field. And the take-home message for this group is that cover crops, appropriately adopted cover crops, lead to clean water. Anyone debate that? All right, we're all on the same page. So I'm going to talk about some kind of technical stuff here.
Jim, just use the arrow key. Just use that arrow.
Got it. So it's kind of difficult putting together a technical agronomic talk or an economic talk to a group that's got such diverse backgrounds. So here's what we're going to get out of it today. All of us are here for water quality, improving water quality. So that's definitely going to take home a take-home message. For those of you that work directly with farmers, I'm going to show you some data. This is summary data, much like we saw before. This is the cliff notes of the cliff notes. But I've got a link to the data where you can get the complete data set, where you can take that data and show it to your farmers to make, I think, what is a really compelling argument, even in our down farm economy right now. For the rest of you, you're still going to see the data. But I think what this presentation is going to show is a compelling story about how farmers are working together in the producer-led movement to improve water quality and to take care of our environment. So we're self-policing in our environment, which is a perfect segue into reintroducing our group to the audience, the Watershed Protection Committee of Racine County. We are one of the older watershed protection groups in the state of Wisconsin. We were chartered in 2018, so this is our 8th year of programming and promoting conservation practices, ultimately for healthier soil and clean water. And to do this programming, we perform a variety of tasks and events throughout the season. We have formal education events, our winter workshop, our summer field days. We have a formal field day. We often have pop-up ad hoc field days driven by some kind of topic out on the landscape. We also are actively engaged in on-farm research, generating data like the data that I'm going to present to you in a minute. And we also conduct more formal university type research at Case Eagle Park, where we are currently comparing regenerative versus conventional agriculture, primarily for economics, but also looking at what are the soil health implications and what are the offsite water quality potentials from these systems. So a range of activities. Again, this is our 8th year, and we are rolling despite funding cuts. What's happened with our funding over time, so we are funded through the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, and initially there was only a handful of groups. But we have grown from the first grant round of 11 groups applying that we now have 49 active groups in the state of Wisconsin promoting healthy soil and clean water. And the funding level has not increased. It's been $1 million for the last 5 years. And so as we get more groups, our funding gets cut. But we continue to find ways to leverage the funding that we do have to continue our programming. We are really well represented. We are at a table over here, and we've got a display, which is where I stole the sign from. So look for the display. We'll come and talk to you. Feel free to come and say hi at lunchtime. All right, so let's talk about economics. I've already covered this next one. Does anyone debate this statement? Cover crops reduce runoff, which leads to water quality improvement. Anyone debate that? That's good, because for the last 25 years, UW Discovery Farms has been documenting that with their on-farm monitoring. And they show that cover crops are an integral part of the water quality problem in both reducing sediment loss in erosion from fields, but also addressing a major problem in no-till. No-till can solve the problem with erosion, but we have an Achilles heel, which is soluble phosphorus loss. The cover crops, especially the overwintering cover crops, like you see in this picture here, this is cereal rye. This is what I'll be talking about today. It does a tremendous job of not only protecting the soil, but also increasing infiltration, which is really important to keep the water from running off. And so the two work in tandem, and Discovery Farm research shows that it does lead to improved water quality. So why economics? The social sciences say, and survey after survey in adoption literature show that farmers, the non-users, need economics, an economic driver in the absence of regulation to adopt cover crops. The low-hanging fruit has already been picked. The farmers that are going to do it willingly for soil health, soil conservation, and water quality, they've already done it. The people that are left, they're going to adopt based on an economic decision, and nobody's really directing or addressing that. So that's the emphasis behind our study here. The non-users have said quite clearly that they want to see hard yield response data and financial data to make the business case. They also are pretty adamant that they want to see data that is generated from working farms. They don't want to see data that's generated from university research stations. They want real world data. And they take it one step further. They say that they want data that is collected by an independent source, not data that is self-reported, because there's some skepticism of the quality of that data. And if they get the data from an advocate, it may paint a rosier picture than there actually is. So we're looking to produce the real world data from farms, and that's the rationale behind the project I'm going to share with you in a second. An economic reason related to that for non-adoption is the leased land problem. There's a perception on the landscape that any conservation practice is a long-term proposition. You don't get an immediate return on investment. It takes time to build and get the return on investment. That's a problem in production agriculture, where 50% of our cropland acres are rented on short-term lease on an annual basis. And so the economic argument is, why would I invest in a practice which is going to take a while to produce a return when I could lose access to that asset that I paid to improve? So this is a real hurdle. In my mind, this is the number one hurdle to broader cover crop adoption. We have a lot of room for improvement in cover crop adoption. So these numbers here come from the most recent USDA survey of agriculture, the Census of Agriculture, of the cropland in the United States. 4.7% has cover crops on it. State of Wisconsin, we're doing much better, 7.9%, and I attribute that difference. A lot of that difference comes from the work of these producer-led groups in the state of Wisconsin. All right, so to generate those numbers, myself and the watershed groups that I work with in Southeast Wisconsin got funding from the USDA SARE program to generate the number and look at the agronomics behind it, to come up with a list of best practices that farmers could follow and have a higher likelihood, a higher probability of having financial success. So we set out in 2022 to generate that data. We conducted 70 replicated on-farm trials from the years 22 to 24 using cereal rye, the cereal rye cover crop. So the rationale behind that is the most prevalent cover crop that's out on the landscape. We were 100% in no-till, and the overwintering cover crop helps us with the soluble phosphorus problem. So that's the reason we're doing it. The other thing to say is that we are in a corn and soybean rotation. So what we're targeting with our data is the predominant agricultural land use in Southeast Wisconsin. We're going big, we're looking for impact. For our trial, and there's a picture of our trial up there, it was a side-by-side comparison, cover, no cover. It was up to the farmer to choose what they were going to do with their cereal rye. They actually had 2 cereal rye treatments, which were a variant on cereal rye management. So it could be something like different seeding rates or it could be different termination timings. But the point is, it was up to them. And then we aggregated that data, did a synthesis analysis, and looked at what caused the yield response and the return. So those are our response variables. These are our key indicators. What was the yield response? How did cover crop management affect that? And then from that, the paired comparisons, we calculated a net margin, dollars per acre. This is the economic component. This calculation is real simple. We've got a yield difference between the two systems, right? Multiply that by the market price. We have to subtract some costs that go with that additional yield. It's not free. You got to get it into the market to get paid for it, right? You got to dry it down to the marketable moisture, and you have to account for nutrient removal. Once we do that, we subtract the price of the cover crop from buying the seed through termination, subtract that total cost, and that's how we arrive at the net margin. All right, data reporting. So we're going to show the data in just a minute. We do report the mean. That's a problem, especially when you're talking about economics. And the reason it's a problem is that data always occurs in a range. So we think about the middle of the data, that being the median, 50% above, 50% below. The average is probably going to be somewhere below. If we just report the average, we don't know what happened up here, which is the reward, the upside potential. We don't know what happened down here, the downside. That's the risk. We need to get a handle on the risk to make the compelling argument, right? So we start with the mean, but then we look at the range of the data, and then we decided to look at what's happening in the top 25% of the data. So let's be frank. I've been out on a speaking tour. I have been accused of cherry picking. Jim, you're showing us the really good data to make your case. No, we had planned to do that. And the key point here is there was a step between analyzing the data and then looking at the full top 25%. We analyzed the data in aggregate. We identified the factors that contribute to yield increases, yield decreases, income increases, financial losses. We use that top 25% to validate what the statistical analysis showed. And then we base our recommendations based on what the top 25% has. Talking to farmers, it's always good to talk about the top 25% because nobody wants to be average in any walk of life, right? Farmers included. We want to be above average. All right, so just a little bit of our trial. I already showed you the picture of the strip trial, side-by-side comparison. At the end of the day, we had like 576 paired comparisons. So that's not big data like you've seen in some of the presentations here, but in agricultural research, that's huge because it takes a full growing season. And for each farm, we only came up with 2 numbers. So it's really big from an agricultural standpoint, but it's not big data. We conducted this trial over a very diverse landscape of Southeast Wisconsin. So 5 Wisconsin counties, and we included 1 Illinois county to make you folks from south of the border feel welcome here today. So in effect, what we had was a triangle from Beaver Dam down to Beloit and then over to Kansasville. This range gives us several things. Differences in soil types, right? Differences in growing season environments, and in particular, temperature is pretty much the same, but we're talking about precipitation. And it is astounding how much variation there is between these regions. Up in Dodge County, Garden of Eden, they have like perfect growing conditions every year. Phenomenal yields, they don't feel any stresses. Down here, Southeast Wisconsin, Racine County, not so. Over the 3-year course of our study, we had really wet conditions, really dry conditions, much more challenging down here. The other regions, somewhere in between. So one thing to say that we had as far as we've got the variation in the growing conditions. One thing that was universal across all 3 environments or all 3 growing seasons was drought. 2023, universally a drought year. This is going to come back in the summary data, and that's some of the results are kind of exciting there. Economic study, we have to talk about our economic component a little bit. How much time do I have? 5 minutes, holy smokes. First year, it was great. Precipitous drop in commodity prices. We had an increase in input prices. Tough in 2 of the years, tough financial conditions for 2 of the years. And that trend continues into where we are right now. All right, so let's jump to the chase. Here's the data. This data slide shows that management of the cover crop is really important. So in the gold is the data from all sites. The green is the top 25%. Let's just, in the sake of time, I gotta move along here. We always saw a yield increase in the top 25%, not only in the average, but in the entire range. As far as the net return, we lost a lot of money across all the different treatments. What the social science data says that people that are looking at it, they're worried about downside risk, and they may look at cost share, but they're gonna weigh how much money they could potentially lose even with that cost share. So it's a no sale. This data does not make a good sale. The top 25%, it does. In corn, we found on average, we lost $10 an acre. Soybeans, it was a wash. So in soybeans, no net gain, but we got the soil conservation, the soil health, and the clean water benefits from having the cover crop for free. Corn, we had to pay $10 an acre to get that. So the overall cost of the cover crop system, $30 an acre for both corn and soybeans, roughly, that is factored into the net margin. So that $10 loss actually represents the true cost of the cover cropping. That's a pretty cheap input price to get the benefits. All right, the second slide here shows the data distribution. So this is really important. So the lines in the middle and the X's, that's where the means are, where the median is. So you can see the upside potential, which is really important, but also the downside risk, both in yield, and you see it broadens out a little bit when we talk about the finances. So that's really important. Under the market conditions of our study, just jumping ahead to the return to cover, we did have some positive returns, but mostly they were negative. So there's room for improvement. And again, the farm economy is really bad. Here is the golden lining, cost share. Cost share has come up several times in conversation here. We asked the question, what if we took the best management practices for the top 25% and applied a common cost share program? In our example, we are using the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, Environmental Quality Incentives Program. We were eligible at the start of the study for EQIP projects using the practices that we used in our research. Our payment rate was $42.60 an acre. You get the cost share, there's no cost with it, so it goes on the revenue side of the equation. What's the net impact of the cost share? It shifts the distribution, the entire distribution up. And the point is, and this is really the point I want to make. So here's the break-even line. Our worst case scenario in corn, $20 to the good. So we made $20. So what that cost share does is it establishes a floor and it gives a safety net to the farmer if they're following the best management practices. And they are eligible to have the upside potential. So everything above the middle of the box up, so they can capture that potentially, but they're guaranteed on the bottom. And I would argue that we should be using this when we're talking with farmers, talk about using the best practices, which are going to be highlighted in the report. I'll show you that link in about a minute now. So talk about that with the farmers and encourage them to use cost share as an insurance program. From a risk management standpoint, there was a couple of things that showed up in our data. A very high percentage of our top 25% were first year ground. You can get a response in the first year. Okay, soybeans do better. Start with soybeans. Here's the link to the data. We hope to have publications that will be available through the websites of the producer-led groups that I've got outlined there. Thank you for your time.